time and time again that language is related to culture. But is there really a relationship? That's what I want to know. I want you guys to think about it during this talk. And if there is a relationship, do you think that's a one-way relationship? Does only language maybe influence culture, or just only culture influence language? Or is it reciprocal? Do they affect each other? Make me so nervous. Okay, and no, I'm just joking. And then the next part, should I pose? Oh, you're not even taking a picture of me. Okay, so the next question is, do students really need to know about the target culture in order to learn or acquire the target language? I think that's a big issue with EFL. Are teachers just responsible to teach language, or do we also need to teach culture? And if we don't teach something about culture to our students, can they still get the language part or not? I think it's a big question. And you guys think about those during my talk and see if hopefully I can help you to answer those. Okay, first I want to give a few examples of how I believe that the way that we express ourselves will exemplify our cultural ideas. What I mean is the way we express things in our own language, whether it's Chinese or English or Spanish or whatever, the way we express those things will present our culture to an outside audience. Someone that isn't part of our culture can look at the way we phrase things and then be able to understand something about our culture. And I have a couple of examples first to give you. Here's the first example. For example, in English, we can say, I make the horse run. Okay, I make the horse run. But if we translated this sentence into Navajo, that's a Native American language, they would never phrase the sentence that way. They would never say, I make the horse run. If you translate it into Navajo, they would say, the horse is running for me. The reason is in American cultural values and other languages, countries that speak English as their mother tongue, we believe we can have control over things. We believe that people in power can have control over other people, or that we can have control over animals. But in the Navajo culture, they don't believe that you can have control over anyone or anything except for yourself. So it's impossible in the Navajo language to say, I make the horse run. They have to say, the horse is running for me. Because in their cultural background, they believe that you have no control over anything else. And if something acts, it acts for itself, not because it is forced to. So we can see, how if we look at the language from one cultural background, we can learn something about the culture. And I have another example too from Arabic speakers and English. Like for example, in English, if we go to the bus stop, okay, and we want to take the bus, but maybe we stand there for a long time, but the bus never came, but you are there, you're really at the bus stop waiting, but the bus never came. But maybe you will say in English, oh, I missed the bus. But an Arabic speaker, when they're speaking Arabic, they would say, the bus missed me, because they don't want to blame themselves. But in English, we put the blame on ourselves. We'll say, I missed the bus. But people from Arabic culture don't like to put the blame on themselves. They don't want to, kind of lose face in front of other people. So they will push the blame onto someone else. So that affects their language because of their cultural values. So that's why in Arabic, if they wanted to say the same thing in Arabic, they could never say, I missed the bus. They would never put the blame on themselves. They would say, the bus missed me. So you can see here that if you look at the language and the way the person speaks and what they say, you can see some underlying hidden cultural meaning behind that. You can understand the person's culture by looking at the way they speak. I think that a lot of us know that because we are familiar with like religion and idioms and things like that, especially in English, like the early bird catches the worm, or don't cry over spilt milk, those kind of things. So we've heard about these kind of idioms before, and we know about religion and things like that, and we can look at these things and know, we know that, or like time is money, that's another one in English. So we can say, we can look at these idioms in the language, and then we know something about American culture or cultures that speak English. We know what they value. We know what they value in that culture based on those kind of idioms and proverbs and even stories and legends. But what I want to focus on today is that not only can we look at these things, but we can also just look at the bigger picture, which is the daily communicative interactions. And what I mean by that, just by looking at the way someone has an informal conversation with another person, or the way that a person will interact when they buy something, that can also tell us a lot about a culture. Not just these obvious things we can study, but we can see the everyday language and look at it and study it and learn something about English-speaking cultures as well. I mean, this can include things like vocabulary, facial expressions, the topics, and the way that they talk about those topics. So I think they are more, those kind of things are even more important. And next, I would actually like to focus on vocabulary especially. How do we start to use certain vocabulary in certain situations? And how do those vocabulary words come about? And how do they have some kind of significance in the target language? So I made a little diagram for you. And if you can think about it, in a culture, language and culture is related because we only have those vocabulary words, or those words, to speak about certain things in a culture because they are significant, they are important. Okay, so you can imagine. Can I use a pointer? Maybe not. Well, anyway, yeah, I can. So if you see that whatever is important in a culture, it keeps getting generated and talked about. Okay, and we use those words to talk about those things. And then when something significant happens, okay, in the culture, when something significant happens, then that event, it could be like an invention of something, like when the telephone was invented, or some big thing. It could be a disaster, like 911, or it could be, let's say there's just like I know it's a greeting sometimes in Taiwan to ask someone, have you eaten yet, right? And something significant happened to change the greeting to that. I guess there was a time when there was a famine and not enough food. So that was something that people wanted to talk about. So after that happened, then that significant thing happened. So then they had to give a name to it, or there was a phrase invented, or something like that. And then it is then incorporated into the language of that culture. And then it keeps going on and on and on. And it seldom, those words seldom die out. So that's another thing another way that culture can influence language. When something happens within the culture, then new vocabulary words or new phrases or new ways of saying things will develop. Just like I mentioned about the invention of the telephone, or September 11th, or just like I said in Chinese, when sometimes greeting someone by asking them, have they eaten? That's another way that culture can influence language. Another is like the surroundings. We only have those words. We only have the words. We only invent the words that we need in order to talk about our culture. Okay. So, for example, in English, there's areas in the western part of the United States that are mostly desert. And there are these people, these Paitui, I guess is how you pronounce it, they're also an American Indian tribe, okay? But they have 17 different words to describe different kinds of dry, sandy areas in the western part of the United States. But in English, we only have 7, okay? If we look at the number of words they have, we can tell that that means that the area is very important to these people. Because they live in this area, they're surrounded by this desert area. Maybe they have to depend on it for the animals that are kept there, or their homes, you know, that kind of thing. So they develop more words to describe those desert areas. Whereas in English, we don't have so many words. Of course, we can say, maybe they have a special word to mean a small, dry hill. But in English, we don't have a word really to say a small, dry, sandy hill. We just can say it in this way, a small, dry, sandy hill. But maybe in their language, they have one word, because that's important. Maybe that's a good place to store food or something like that. I don't know. I don't know much about these people, but I just know that they have a lot of words that are related to the area they live. And I think you guys have probably heard about Eskimos as well, and the words they have with snow, right? So because they have so much, because they're so familiar with snow and see it every day, they will have more words to describe those things, because they're more important to them. And this kind of relationship between culture and language is described as a Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Have you guys heard of that before? Heard of it? Well, it's talking about the way language is related among language, thought, and behavior. And there's 2 different versions, strong and weak. And basically it just means that some of it says, oh, some things in the language is influenced by culture. That's the weak version. And the strong version says everything in the culture influences the language. These are 2 guys that came up with this theory, because they started to study language and started to study cultures and look at the vocabulary people use and the phrases they use and see if that had somehow related to the way those people behave in their daily lives. And they also tried to say that the words we have, the words that we have, the vocabulary we have, can limit what we can think about. If we don't have certain vocabulary or certain ways of expressing ourselves, then we cannot think in this way. So that's why some people say, you know, if you study a second language, when you study that second language, you kind of have a second personality that is a little bit different than the personality you have with your first language. Because you learn new vocabulary words, you learn a new culture, and you learn a new way of interpreting things or seeing things. And that's kind of what this hypothesis is about. How it's related to the vocabulary that we use and the phrases we use in the language. How it limits us in our thinking. I don't know if I quite agree with it or not, though. Ask me when my Chinese is proficient, and I'll see if I gotta do mine. So after this hypothesis was invented, people started asking some questions. So people started to ask, okay, so what came first? The language and then the culture? Or we just have this culture, so we invent those words? Because we live in this area, so we invent those words in our language, or maybe we already have the language, and this kind of helps to mold our culture. And another question was, you know, like I mentioned before, is there a relationship between language and culture? And, you know, from what I've said already, what little I have told you, yes, there is. And it is reciprocal. So, you know, where we live, what we do, the way we behave, whatever is available in our culture can help generate new phrases, can help generate new vocabulary. But also, the vocabulary we already have available can also influence what's happening in our daily life with our culture. So it's like a circular pattern. Both of them are constantly interacting. Culture and language are constantly interacting and changing all the time. So the next part I'm going to talk about is some lexical categories, mostly about how you can really see this influence of language and culture, especially in the vocabulary. Still awake?
Yes.
Still with me? Okay. So if we study the language, it can tell us more specifically about that particular language's culture. And some things we can study is lexical components, lexical classifications, universal processes, and focal meanings and prototypes. And I'll tell you what each of those are in the next slides. For example, in English, lexical components, vocabulary here. You can see how in English we value, like in English-speaking cultures value the horse more than the otter. Everybody know what the otter is, I hope. But if you see here, for a horse, we have different names for the baby horse, the pre-adult horse, and the adult horse. And we also have different names depending on if they are male or female. Like, for example, if you have the pre-adult male horse, it's a filly, okay, or the pre-adult female horse is a colt. So we have a specific shaka. Okay, so we have the special words to describe these different types of horses. But here we have an otter, a mammal. No matter what, if it's a baby, adult, female, or male, we only call it otter. So that means Americans, and especially any English-speaking culture, do not value the otter as much as they value the horse, right? Because if they valued the otter, they would have given the otter lots of different names depending on its age and its sex, like it did with horse. So you can have a look sometimes at the language and see how many different types words that they have to describe how specific the thing is, and then we can say, wow, this culture really values this particular thing because they have a lot of words to describe this certain object. I have another example with kinship terms, the words we use to describe the people we're related to. Like you see here, this is another Native American language. The reason there's so many Native American languages is because a lot of those linguists in the United States went to study those Native Americans because they're close by, easy to get access to. So all the research I read referred to Native Americans. But you can see here in English, when you speak of your mother's sister, we call them aunt, and mother's brother is uncle. And it's the same thing with fathers. The father's sisters and the mother's sisters are both called aunt, right? But the mother's brother is called uncle, and also the father's brother is called uncle. But, wait a minute. Yes, this is right. Sorry. So here, in this Native American language, the mother's sister is also called mother. So the child, in a sense, has many mothers. So what can we learn by looking at this about this culture? Well, that means that the mother's sister can treat those children as if they are her children. So that means culturally she has the right to punish them, to reward them. Those children are going to look up to her and try to copy her behavior because that's the mother. So a lot of different things are going to change, and we're going to have to and it can help us to understand that culture better. But you see, you notice though, it's also similar with the uncle and the father. Now the mother's brothers are still considered uncle, and they have no authority. But the father's brothers do have authority. They have the authority to be a father figure. So the father and all of his brothers can treat that child with whatever is appropriate in that culture for a father to do. I don't know, maybe the father in that culture is responsible for punishment, let's say. So that means that that father and then all the father's brothers can punish that child. So you can tell here when you look and see also at kinship terms, it can tell you the relationship, how close maybe the extended families are to each other. And you guys have similar things going on with Chinese as well. It's so complicated. I don't even want to. It's easier to talk about Native American than Chinese. There's so many words. I asked my friends before about what's your uncle's name? I don't know, uncle. His name is Uncle. I never called him by his name. I don't know his name. So I don't want to talk about Chinese. It's too difficult for my PhD. Okay. So as I was saying, the categories in a language are culturally determined. There are other ways in which we can look at language and see something about the culture, how it's related to. Like some languages have masculine nouns, feminine nouns, or neuter nouns. Or another way is animate or inanimate objects. We can also look at semantic meanings or shape and texture. You know, they classify them in many different ways. Just like, for example, you know, realistically in English we have a whale. You know, a whale. We consider in English a whale a fish, but actually a whale breathes air and gives milk to its young. So it's not a fish, it's a mammal. But we put it in this kind of fish category because it's in the water. So we consider it a fish, but it's not really. And that's just because of our language, how we view things. Maybe another culture will view that differently. Same thing goes with color terms as well. They did an experiment, these researchers did an experiment, and they had, let me see the number, 329 colors. They had these little pieces of tile and had different colors, different shades. And they gave these tiles to 98 different language backgrounds, okay? And they asked the people to sort the tiles, like put all of the orange one, you know, put all of the tiles in groups according to color, how many colors there are. And they were all shades, you know, the tiles were all different shades. And if you see here, here's the language of the people who were asked to do this, you know, to do this task, to put these tiles in different piles of colors. And a lot of these languages are African languages, by the way. And this is supposed to be Japanese, and that's a typo. Oops, that should be a P. Japanese, not Javanese. And what they found out was that some cultures only have two colors. Some cultures, when they see this, they think black, and when they see this, they think black. My paper, white, okay? But that maybe something that is a light color, they will consider white, and things that are anything that's a little bit dark is considered black. So they only have two colors in those cultural groups, all the way down, you know, to 8 to 11, you know. And these are the colors they would separate them in. And Mandarin, you know, had 6. They would usually separate the tiles into 6 different groups. They had all these tiles and they would separate them into 6 different groups. And they found out something very interesting in with one of the results with Russian. With Russian language, they found out that Russians feel that light blue and dark blue are 2 different colors. They don't believe that they are both blue. And it was very interesting. I think it's because of their cultural, you know, their background, that they interpret the colors differently. We all see the same colors, but we all see the same colors, but they put them in different kinds of groups. Thought that was kind of interesting. And another is the prototypes. Like, for example, prototype means, you know, the best of something. Like if you said to someone, cat, and the image that that person has in their mind is culturally bound, meaning that they're taught when they grow up what is the best cat. You know, when you see the word cat, what does a cat look like? Or bird, or sandwich, or chair. And they did an experiment where they asked Mandarin speakers and English speakers, can you show me a picture of the most typical sandwich, you know, that you can think of, or in the bird and the chair. And these were the kind of the results that they were given. As you can see, depending on the language background and the cultural background, it influenced the look of the object. So maybe the Mandarin speaker, when they hear sandwich, they think that they see this, okay? But and that's not in English. That's when they hear the word sandwich spoken in Chinese, okay, in Mandarin Chinese. And when they hear bird, they saw this, and then they saw this for chair. And this is the same thing with an English speaker. So that's culturally related. Even when we do share the same words across the languages, even when we do have the same concrete word, what we believe that word means is slightly different. So sometimes, unless you can go into that culture and get a feel of what it means, maybe even you hear the word bird and you know what bird means in another language. In that other language, you still don't have the visual mental picture until you learn their culture, until you understand the culture. You're still lacking something because you're still not on the same level, because the speaker may say bird, but what you see in your mind isn't the bird that speaker sees in his or her mind. So that's just like what I was just saying, is that all people will carry some subconscious and conscious cultural background knowledge that helps them communicate. And this is really really important for our students, because we need them to understand when they hear a phrase or a word in English, we need them to really understand exactly what that means in the other culture. Not just translate the word into our own language and say, oh, this is the word for bird, or this is the word for cat. We need to show them this is what the American thinks of as a cat. This is what an American thinks of as a bird. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. Because just them knowing the words isn't enough. Okay? For example, you know, in English we have a lot of words to mean big, like jumbo, extra large, super size, family size, gigantic. You know, so what is the difference between those? Maybe I know, but maybe you don't know. You know, so you have to. It's sometimes it's a responsibility to, as a teacher, to try to figure out what does those different words mean, and we have to sometimes learn ourselves before we're able to tell our students. Another example, sometimes we have to teach our students about some words that they cannot use around certain people. Like, for example, I mentioned here boy and girl. Sometimes for African Americans, to call them a boy or a girl is derogatory. It carries a bad meaning because they were suppressed in the United States before, and often they were treated like they didn't have names. So their ancestors were often called boy or girl, you know, just because they were a slave or just a servant or something like that. So that is carried on, you know, throughout their individual culture. So sometimes in certain situations it's inappropriate to use certain words. And I think you guys have probably all heard communicative competence, you know, being able to use the language in the right situations and using it properly, right? And I think that is one of the most important things for us as language teachers to do, is to get this point across to our students. Even our young learners can benefit from this. And I have two examples that I was told of before I want to share with you, where there's a native speaker and a non-native speaker, and they are trying to communicate with each other, but they have a cultural misunderstanding because they don't understand those vocabulary used or those phrases. So what happened was, we have A and B, and they meet each other. And A is a non-native speaker of English, and B is the native speaker of English, okay? So A says hello, and B says, oh, hi, because they just meet, right? And then A said, what is wrong? You look so down. And then B says, I just found out that my grandmother died. And then A says, oh, that's okay. And then B begins to cry, right? Because grammatically it's correct, right? But it's inappropriate. You could just say, oh, that's okay. But maybe that, but that is grammatically correct. It's, why can't they say that? So they need to know culturally, there are certain phrases you say in these kind of situations, right? Here's one more example. So another A and B meet. And A is the non-native speaker of English, and B is the native speaker of English. And A is going to give B a gift. So A says, hi, Judy. And B says, hey, oh, here, I saw this yesterday and bought it for you. It reminded me of you. B says, you shouldn't have done that. Okay, and then at this point, A looks confused, right? Because she does not understand that B's answer is a polite way of saying thank you, right? So A leaves confused and hurt because she thinks the gift has been rejected, because the person said, you shouldn't have done that. So they don't understand. They couldn't pick up on it. They couldn't hear the tone of the voice. The person saying, oh, you shouldn't have done that. They just interpreted that as a command, asking, why did you do that? That was the wrong thing to do. So it's our responsibility to tell about these situations, right? And I just thought of another example. Like, my parents live in the South, and when I taught before in the States, there was some students, a student from China that came to study there, and she went to Walmart, like Carrefour, and she paid for her stuff, and then she was walking away, and the lady just said, y'all come back now. So the girl came back. What do you want? And the lady said, I don't want anything. And then the girl said, but you told me to come back. And she said, yeah, so come back, And the girl said, I'm here. And she means, no, I mean in the future. And the girl said, why do I need to come back? So then they're so confused, So then the lady who is selling the stuff feels so aggravated. Why doesn't this person learn English, And then the girl feels so aggravated. Why this woman wants to treat me so bad, Doesn't she understand my English is poor? So then, there's the conflict and the clash and the trouble, right? Okay, let me see how much time I have left. Oh, I'm doing well. Am I talking too fast? Yes, you're asleep. I'm surprised I can remember everything. I feel so good. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about teaching culture. And in this part, I'm not going to tell you exactly activities. Later on your handouts, there's some activities that you can just, pull out and just do in your class. But this is a bigger picture. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to tell you some ways that you can take your English curriculum that you already have, your English books, and try to incorporate culture into those activities or the materials that you already have. I mean, if you're not already. On your handout, you have 12 guidelines for teaching culture. I don't have time to go over those, and I think you can have a look at those. That's your homework. You can just take it home and have a look and see what is your responsibility as a teacher when if you want to teach culture. What are your responsibilities? The 12 guidelines that you need to try to follow. But what I do want to talk about is knowing about, knowing how, knowing why, and knowing oneself. And these are categories that you need to think about and be sure to teach when you want to incorporate some cultural component into your language teaching. And I hope that by telling you these different categories, that you will be able to, you will see that it's very explicit, and then you will be able to incorporate it easily into your curriculum. So let me go to the first one, knowing how. Actually, let me go to the next one. Knowing about. Let me do about first. What I mean by knowing about is just teaching your students about a culture. Okay, I think you probably do this already. You know, you tell them, oh, in America they eat a lot of cheese or something like that, right? Or whatever. You know, it can be any kind of cultural thing that you want to teach the students. But you just tell them about it. Okay, that's the first step. It's kind of telling them about it, and you need to tell them about the target culture, and I don't know. You can also tell them about your own personal experience if you have encountered the culture, or some concepts about the culture. And what you want to be able to do is you want your students to be able to just understand you, right? So you want them to be able to know what you're talking about and be able to give you the feedback to show that they understand, and they can explain it to you again. And you can use a lot of material to just teach about the culture, like authentic materials, anything from the target culture. And it doesn't have to necessarily be with language on it, but that's always good. Anything taken from the culture, your textbook, your experience, or other people's experiences from that culture that tell you about them, and then you transfer it on to your students, right? So what your role is you're a source, a resource, and you just want to elicit the answers. You want to supply the answers and try to prompt your students to see if they can give those answers back to you. And that's just teaching about. You're just showing the students some cultural component. Let me see if I have an example. Here I got an example. You show the students a picture or a photograph that represents some kind of social scene. It could be like a birthday party or whatever, you know, McDonald's, going to McDonald's, or at the park, just anything to show what people in that culture do, okay? And you ask them a question like, what do you see? You know, and see what their answer is. And you just let the children, play. And you kind of prompt them and move them in the right direction to try to get them to notice the things that you feel are culturally important. And you don't have to just use pictures. You can use anything, movies or, anything that you can think of that's from the culture. Just something that you think that exemplifies, gives a good example of American culture or British culture or whatever culture you're trying to teach. It doesn't necessarily have to be, English. So also, another way what you can do is just tell your students about your own experience. And you can tell it like a story to them. And in that way, you are the source. And you can, hopefully your students will be engaged and interested. Hopefully it's something funny, or something interesting, and they will be engaged, and they will want to ask you questions. And of course, I'm not saying that this needs to be in English. Of course not. The English and culture, you know, sometimes it's easier to use native language a little bit to explain those cultural things. They're not going to know all of those vocabulary words, especially if they're very, very young learners. But because culture and language are related, you know, sometimes it's beneficial. Let them know the cultural part, and then they can gain the vocabulary later. Maybe it can also help to motivate them. So that's just knowing about. Now let me go back to knowing how. Okay, for knowing how, I just need, how do the students do that? Okay, so for example, if you're telling students about some holiday or some event in the United States, first you tell them about it, right? You present it to them. Let's take, I don't know, let's take some holiday like Easter, right? Maybe you tell them about the Easter holiday, and then you teach them how to celebrate that holiday. You teach them how to color the Easter eggs, right? If you don't know how, you have to find out, right? You have to be the source. So you have to learn how to color the Easter eggs, how to make a basket. Or if it's Valentine's Day, you have to find out how to make your own Valentine's Day box and your own Valentines for your classmates. Or if it's St. Patrick's Day, you have to learn how, you know, the students have to learn how they can draw their own 4-leaf clover and cut it out, or whatever, you know. You can choose anything. It doesn't have to be a holiday, but you have to teach them how to do that thing. And even if you showed them a picture before, let's say of a cultural scene of a party or something, a certain kind of party, then those students have to learn how to behave in that kind of setting or that kind of party or whatever. And it's your job as a teacher to, you know, show it to them and then let them perform, let them try it themselves. And then you have to model them, right? You have to model for them. First show them how, and then coach them, you know, when they make a mistake or go in the wrong direction. And I put a lot of things that, you know, the students can do, like operations, I mean like doing things, just like coloring the eggs, or rituals, like party. How do they have a class party, or exchange gifts, you know, or something like that at Christmas, or, you know, some holiday. Or even have them learn some dialogues, or role play, all of these kind of different kind of things. And they have to learn how to do it. And you have to try your best. Of course, it's not realistic because it's not in the English environment. But you have to try to make your classroom a safe, comfortable environment for the students to try. You know, that's all we can do, right? Is try to get the students to try and make sure they know it's okay to make a mistake. But we have to know how to do it first. Here's one example. If you chose like a short dialogue, and it has a nonverbal and verbal language, and you just let the students experiment with that. Maybe in English environments we have certain facial expressions that you don't use in Taiwanese culture. So you show the students those facial expressions, and then you do it for them, and then you let them do it and learn how. And you may have two students together, and you want one of them to say, "Oh, show that you're angry," in an American way. Don't let them put their finger up. No, but another way, you know. You can show them how to behave that you're happy, or, you know, something like that, in different cultural ways. You can also reflect on yourself. So the next one is why. So we can't just stop there. We can't just tell the students about the culture, some part of the culture, then show them how to do it. We have to also go back and tell them why the people do that in that culture. So maybe sometimes we have to find out. Just like I said, we don't just say, "Oh, at Easter time, they will color eggs and hide them and have a party together. Yeah, happy time. Let's have an Easter egg hunt in our class. You have to explain to the students why they do that in the target culture. Why do they behave in that kind of way? And some of them are easier to define than others. You may have to be a researcher, meaning you may have to seek out why do they dress in a certain way? Why do they behave in a certain way in these kind of situations? Why do they buy these kind of things? Why are they always eating fast food? You have to look at the culture and find out why, and then you have to be able to explain that to the students, and you have to make sure that they understand, and they can compare that to their culture. So here's one example, like where I told you about the picture before. After you have the picture and you've already talked about the how, and talked about and then also how, you can then go into telling them why they are at this event, why they're celebrating, or whatever they're doing inside the picture. But just be sure you don't just leave the students hanging there. And the last part is knowing oneself. That's self-reflection. It's that you need the students to try to find similar things in their own culture. Comparing the target culture with their own culture. Like, oh, do we have any similar holiday in Taiwan? Or something like that. Or do we do some similar behavior, or do we do something different? And then try to, explain to the students why the behavior in Taiwan, in Taiwanese culture, is different than in American culture. And make sure that they understand that, no culture is better than any other culture. Every culture is equal. And we all behave in different ways just because we're living in different living environments, or we have access to different resources, or whatever. There's no culture better than the other, and we have to make sure that students understand that. And sometimes it's good just to let the students ask questions and listen to what they have to say. Otherwise, we don't know what's going on in their mind. Maybe they don't even understand. Maybe they don't even know in their own culture what's going on, or why they do those things. They just do those because they follow everyone else. But you should be able to step back. As a teacher, it's your job to step back and look at your culture and say, why do we do the things we do? And help to explain to those students. And just like with the scene, I told you about, if you have that picture, then you can compare and say, oh, do we do anything like this in Taiwan, or why? Something like that. And let the students give you some feedback. I'm still okay with time. Amazing. Actually, I skipped so many things. I have so many notes, but I skipped a lot. Okay, here is an example. Don't try to read this, it's so small. But I have an example about greetings and introductions. This may be a little bit difficult for elementary school, but maybe the last year, if you teach any last year students, it would be okay. But this example is like greetings and introductions, and I took this out of a textbook. This one is almost word for word from the textbook. And the teacher was Japanese, and she wants to teach her students about greetings in America. So we have the knowing about. She taught that there are different types of handshakes in the United States, and that some handshakes are appropriate and some are inappropriate. Meaning, sometimes you have to shake hands and other times you shouldn't shake hands. Also, the teacher talked about that the eye contact in North American introductions is very important, right? And that there's an appropriate time to shake hands during an introduction. If you lose the chance, you know, in the beginning, it's better not to do it at all, you know, that kind of thing. And talked about small talk, like when you first meet someone, you have to talk about something, a little bit about something, otherwise you were just staring at each other. But there should be some topics that everybody should be okay to talk about. And then ways to respond that's inappropriate to inappropriate questions. Like if someone asks you some question that you don't want to answer, like how much money do you make, or are you married? Then you'll know how to answer it in a polite way, not to you know, make that person angry or something. And how that, you know, in American culture, you can't ask, you're not supposed to ask those kind of questions. So that's what the teacher did first. She presented the material and then showed the students how. So she would demonstrate all the varieties of handshakes, different kinds of handshakes, and contrast between, and show what is a comfortable handshake and what is an uncomfortable handshake. And then after that, it was showing them how to introduce yourself in English. So the teacher is showing all of this stuff first. And then how to start a conversation and some small talk, and how to not, you know, ask those kind of inappropriate questions. And then of course the students will practice those kind of things. After they practice it for a while and got, you know, we're getting it down, then the teacher has to tell them why. Why are those things important? Why do you think that they may be polite or something like that? And also the value behind a handshake. Like for example, the teacher showed why do we have the handshake? You know, why do Americans shake hands, and why do Japanese bow? And then the last part is reflection, of course, and have the students think about what they've learned. And because Japanese will bow, so they need to talk about their own culture and like how Japanese use the bow and how it is different from the handshake, and how maybe there are some similarities, how Japanese would communicate and how Americans would communicate, and what would be appropriate in those situations, and what for Japanese, and what would be appropriate for Americans. So